Hello, welcome in everybody. Hope you're all doing well. I'll give it just a minute or so to let everybody kind of trickle in. In the meantime, if you'd like to use the chat, you can enter in the state that you're joining us from today. I always love reading where everybody's from. Kansas, South Carolina, Missouri. A lot of people from Kansas today. Louisiana, Wisconsin, DC. Awesome. Okay. Well, welcome in. My name's Amber Johnstone. I'm with the ALS Association. I want to thank you for joining us for another installment of our Empowering Your ALS Journey webinar series. The goal of this series is to empower you to live fully and with purpose, regardless of where you are on your ALS journey. The title of today's webinar is Exploring ALS Clinical Trials: What they are, how to find them, and what happens next. A few things to know before we begin. Rest assured you're muted and you're not on camera, so you can relax and enjoy the presentation. We'll be using both the chat and the Q&A feature today to allow you to participate in the discussion. So take a moment and locate those buttons at the bottom of your screen. There will be time at the end of the webinar to answer questions, and to make it easier for our panelists to separate the questions from the general chat, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your question at any time during the webinar. There will be a short survey that we ask you to complete at the end of the webinar, and it should appear in your browser automatically once the webinar ends. This survey helps us to know your thoughts on not only this presentation, but also ideas for topics that you'd like us to consider for the future. Lastly, the webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Empowering Your ALS Journey webinar page in about a week. This is also where you can view recordings of our previous webinars and sign up for upcoming webinars. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Dr. Kuldip Dave, the Senior Vice President of Research at the ALS Association. Dr. Dave joined the association in 2019 and oversees the research program. In this role, he develops and implements the broader research vision by setting annual priorities and department goals, including research funding strategy, research programs, and strategic initiatives. He engages with various stakeholders, including key opinion leaders from academia, government, industry, and other nonprofit organizations. Dr. Dave received his bachelor's degree in biology from Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. He received his PhD degree in pharmacology and physiology from Drexel University College of Medicine in Philadelphia, PA. He went on to do a postdoctoral fellowship at a small biotech company in Pennsylvania, where he was first exposed to the drug development process. He went on to work for pharmaceutical company Wyeth for 2 years before joining the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. At MJFF, he oversaw a $30 million portfolio and led 2 priority therapeutic areas. After 9 years at MJFF, he joined the ALS Association as the head of the research program. Dr. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Amber, and thank you, everybody, for joining today. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks for joining, taking some time to understand more about clinical trials. So I will get started. And just so that everybody is oriented on this, I have 2 screens here. My slides are on this screen, so you'll see me look back and forth. That's probably why. So today I wanted to talk to you about clinical trials. And, I'm not trying to uh, kind of, say it in such a way that it's shocking, but I think it's true that clinical trials are experiments. Um, Today, we will focus on the clinical research side of things, as in what's happening in people. So we're not talking about preclinical research. That's really important, understanding biology, lab research, biomarkers, preclinical drug development. I'm not going to talk about any of that today, but just want you to know that those are really important components of how we get here to clinical trials. Okay, so then now there are two types of clinical research. Again, this is research in people. Uh, One is observational studies, and another are clinical trials. Observational studies, we're not going to talk about today, but I think you should know about them. Observational studies help answer questions about ALS by collecting and analyzing data without any kind of intervention. So researchers don't try to change outcomes like disease progression or survival. Instead, they collect information and make observations about people's ALS journey, health, and the care they receive. That's observational studies. That's different from clinical trials. Clinical trials is where you aim to test new treatments. Again, these are experiments. They're carefully designed experiments to try to see if an intervention, such as a drug treatment, will have an impact on disease progression or survival. So, in a clinical trial, as this slide says, besides drug treatment, you could be testing an intervention such as assistive technology. You could be testing a medical device. You could be looking at social support or diet restriction, for example, and trying to see if that has an effect on disease progression. These things are called intervention. So, intervention or interventional clinical studies or clinical trials. Now, why do we do these experiments? We do them because the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, requires it before that intervention is approved. They, in fact, require a series of progressively larger experiments to assess both safety and efficacy. Efficacy means, does it work? And I'll talk about that in the next slide. But before we do that, let's talk about some benefits and risks of being in a clinical trial. I think the possible benefits include getting access to treatments that are still in development. Even though these are experiments and these are experimental treatments or therapies, if you're in a trial, you have a likelihood to be on that experimental therapy. And so you get access to it prior to the rest of the world gets access to it after the FDA approves it. And so that's a benefit. The other benefit is contribution to ALS research. By you contributing and participating in a clinical trial, you are contributing to ALS research. Even if that trial fails, um, what you're doing is providing uh, specimens, providing data, and in even these, even if the data is negative, it can help the next generation of drug trials because with every clinical trial, the next trial learns on that, it iterates on that. And so that's really, really important. Um, and another benefit is that it helps future patients, most likely for ALS trials, which are about 2 to 3 years in duration. You're probably the trials are probably going to be much shorter compared to when the drug approval happens, which could take a few years. And so, in many ways, when you are participating or raise your hand to be in trials, you are helping future patients because this therapy that is being tested today could be the future treatment or the future cure for tomorrow. But there are also some possible risks that you should know about. One, it's an experiment. It's an experimental treatment. You do not know the effectiveness of this therapy. We don't know whether it works. So you could be giving up time and travel and your, physical and psychological burden of being in a trial uh, for a drug that is not effective. Um, there could be side effects of this drug. These have not been tested, or maybe they have been tested, but every phase of the trial you're in, safety is being assessed. And, this drug could have some kind of side effect, some safety issue that may impact either your ALS or maybe some other aspects. And that may be an issue to consider. There's always and we'll talk about this quite a bit in slides coming up, always a possibility you may get uh, to be in the placebo group. So even though the benefit is that you may get access to experimental therapy, if you're in the placebo group, at least for the 6 months or the 9 months, you may not get placebo. You may not get exposure to that experimental therapy. You may be getting placebo. And finally, the time and travel it takes to be in the trial itself. And so again, I think, this is not trivial. We have um, Michael Wilson and Wendy Wilson. They are champions for the ALS Association. Michael has ALS and they live in Oklahoma. And Michael and Wendy always describe that when Michael was in a trial, they had to travel about 6 hours. Each time they had to go to the trial site. Wendy had to drive Michael about 6 hours to the trial site and then stay overnight sometimes and come back the next day. And, that's a time and travel and effort that someone in your family has to be with you, or caregiver, or a friend that has to come with you to the travel site and get you there and get you back. And so these are things that are possible risks or burdens that are involved with the trials. All right, so I talked to you about the FDA asks us, requires of us to do these trials and these different phases. So what are these different phases? And so Um, there are three phases of clinical trials. So I'll go through each one of these one by one. The first phase here on the left is um, phase one. These are trials that are usually testing potential new treatments for the very first time in humans. And so, because of that, the drug is generally given to a small group, often 20, maybe 50, between 20 and 50 people, sometimes even less than 20. Sometimes these are healthy volunteers, but sometimes they may also include people living with ALS. And the goal of this phase is really to evaluate safety, so that in this case, participants are closely monitored for any adverse events or side effects. Remember, before phase one, a drug has never been tested in human. It's first in human testing or sometimes first in ALS testing. And so it's really important to monitor for adverse events, for side effects, and if the investigational treatment shows signs of causing serious harm, testing is stopped, and this will not advance any further. So that's phase one. And again, take home message for phase one, it assesses safety and tolerability. Then you move to phase two. So if a drug is safe in phase one, you then move to phase two. And during this phase of drug development, researchers are usually trying to determine what's the best dose of the drug. What's the best route of administration? By mouth, by injection? What's the timing of doses? How quickly do we have to give them? Does it have to be given every day? Does it have to be given twice a day? Does it have to be given once a week, once a month? These are the types of things that are collected in phase two. Information about, will the investigational treatment, will it benefit the health or function of people living with ALS? That's also collected. Um, However, generally that type of efficacy is collected in larger groups, where, such as in phase three. But in phase two, which generally is somewhere between 50 and 100, 150, 200 people, this is where you again assess for safety and tolerability because that's really important. We got to do that in every phase. But you look at dose, timing, route of administration. You may look at some biomarkers to see if, there are things within your body, some blood markers, some spinal fluid marker that is changing. And you look for target engagement. Target engagement is the drug doing what it's supposed to do? So if it's supposed to be a mitochondrial drug, is it changing some mitochondrial biomarker? That's called target engagement. And so these are the types of things that happen in phase two. Now, once a drug has passed phase two, as in does not show any safety signal, then you start to do larger phase three trials. And the phase three trials involve enough people living with ALS to determine whether that investigational treatment is effective. So this is, again, it varies deep, quite a bit depending on the type of therapeutic you have, but you could have anywhere between 200 to 500 people in phase three. And what you're looking for here is could this drug slow down or stop disease progression or improve survival? Now, you know, um, why why phase three trials are this big? Because we need to enroll hundreds of participants, because symptoms and disease progression vary widely from person to person. So there's so much variability that we need to have these large trials so that we can see an efficacy signal. And that's why if you're wondering why these trials are so big and why they take so long to recruit and why they're so long, it's because ALS is a really, really diverse or heterogeneous disease. If you've met one person with ALS, you've met just that one person with ALS. And so you got to have statistically so many people in your trial so that you can assess, again, safety and tolerability, which is really important, biomarkers, target engagement, but in this case, in phase three, you're looking at efficacy or effectiveness. Now, just FYI, there is something called phase four trials. We're not going to talk about it today. It's not shown here. Phase four trials continue to monitor treatment after it has been approved by the FDA. So we don't have it shown here, but let's say something goes through phase three and it's now FDA approved. FDA still monitors that treatment. Actually, the pharma company would still monitor that treatment, and that's what is called real world data. And we will continue to look for treatment safety and effectiveness within that real world data. Okay, so now that I hope you understood what these three phases of clinical trials are, I'll move on to, you might be wondering, what does our trial pipeline look like? And I'm really happy to report to you that our trial pipeline is very robust. Um, there are more than 40 interventional trials for ALS that are currently recruiting all over the world. 40. Now, it may not sound like a lot, but let me tell you, compared to other rare diseases that have similar incidence and prevalence, we are punching way above our weight. I've spoken to people like me, heads of research in other rare diseases, who look at ALS and wish that they had a robust and diverse pipeline like ours. Now, that does not mean we're going to be happy with this number. The ALS Association has a strategy to have even more better and faster trials for ALS. So we're not going to rest on this number, but rest assured, um, our pipeline is robust and diverse. And what do I mean by that? See some of the names here in phase one, phase two, phase three. By the way, there are 40 names like this. I'm only showing you four in each of these just as an example. And I don't mean to leave anything out, or this is not showing what's my favorite or what we have funded. This is just to give you a sense of the type of studies that are going on. What you see here are names of drugs. For example, VTX002 is the name of the drug. And then in the parentheses, what you're seeing is the biological target that these drugs are going after. So VTX002 is going after TDP43. And so you could see that, you know, the amazing thing about this pipeline when I look at it and what gets me excited is look how robust it is. You know, we need the ALS pipeline to be this way. We have no idea which one of these drugs will be the cure of tomorrow. So we do need more shots on goal. We know that over 90%, 95% of drugs fail as they walk through this pipeline. So the more shots on goal we have, the more chances we have that some or a few of these would actually get past this pipeline and get approved. Now, when I say diverse, you might wonder, what do you mean by diversity in this pipeline? Well, there are multiple pathways that are being targeted. So some of these drugs are targeting inflammation, some are targeting autophagy, some are targeting mitochondrial dysfunction, some are targeting sodium channels, for example, which is sort of neuronal firing. So there's just a lot of different pathways that are being gone after in this pipeline. The other way this is a really diverse pipeline is there are different modalities or approaches. So some of these drugs are small molecules, chemical compounds. Some of them are antibodies. Some of them are antisense oligonucleotides like Qalsody, which is approved by the FDA. Some of these are gene therapies. So again, we want that. We want that diversity in the different type of approaches we have. Um, and these programs are led by small companies and by large pharma. And that is exactly what we want. We want a diverse, robust pipeline of drugs where all parts of the pipeline are represented by different aspects of pharma companies so that, all of our eggs are not in one basket, right? That we have this diversity within our pipeline. So I think I made my take-home message is robust and diverse pipeline. And I hope if there's one thing you take away from this talk, I hope that you do take away that we have a lot of positive things to look forward to. Some of these drugs are really, really exciting. All right. So now that we have gone through these phases, and I'm hoping you all can see the slides here, um, I wanted to take a little bit of a deep dive into what a trial looks like. What is a trial? What is a randomized clinical trial? So, couple of things again. Randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials are the gold standard. So remember what I said earlier, clinical trials are experiments. They're heavily controlled in terms of the conduct of the trial. So let me go through each of these terms and why they are important. So randomized means that participants are divided into two groups. One group getting the interventional treatment or the study drug. The other group receives a placebo. Now, I think in most ALS trials, especially later ones like phase 3, you'll see either a 3-to-2 design. So for every three people on drug, there are two people on placebo, or you'll see a 2-to-1 design. For every two people on drug, one person is on placebo. So randomizing is really important. Why do we randomize? Well, because of the heterogeneity in ALS. Remember, I told you if you've met one person with ALS, you've met just one person with ALS. Every person with ALS looks different in terms of their symptoms, in terms of how their disease progresses. So by randomly assigning participants, we hope that heterogeneity or diversity is spread between the two groups. So you can make an apples to apples comparison. I hope that makes sense to you. So that's what we mean by randomization. What do we mean by double blind? Well, double blind means that neither the participant nor the researcher or the clinician know who is getting the study drug or who is getting placebo. Again, in this case, they're both blinded to the treatment. This is really necessary to make sure that bias from either the participant or the researcher does not figure into the trial. Ideally, after the trial is complete, participants would be unblinded, as in told whether they were on drug placebo. And so this is why double blind is so important. And three, placebo controlled means that there is a group that gets an inactive substance that looks and tastes the same and given in the same exact way as the study drug. So why is placebo important? Why use placebos in a trial for a disease as serious as ALS? Because the placebo effect is real. And not only is it real, it's common. A placebo effect is essentially possibility that people may feel better even when receiving placebo if they believe it is of benefit. We know that this placebo effect is real because there have been many open label trials in ALS. Open label trials are trials where the participants and the researchers both know that they're getting the drug. And almost every open label trial almost always reports benefits. Uh, it's just the nature of the disease we're in. This is not just us. This happens in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and other neurological diseases, but especially in a disease as serious and deadly as ALS, we really want things to work. And when there is a possibility of that benefit, there's a bigger possibility of that placebo effect. And so, there are actually a couple of examples of this. The famous ones are minocycline and lithium. Two, two drugs both showed benefit in early stage open label trials. Benefit. Patients were reporting lithium's working for me, minocycline's working for me. But there was no placebo in those trials. When then they were followed up with a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, both of these drugs failed. And so this, I think, is example, and we have seen this over and over in ALS. And so placebo is really important. And so what you see here is a slide that shows you that, participants are randomly split into groups. So let's say you start with 60 people, 60. And if you're doing a 2-to-1 randomization, then you would have 40 people in the investigational treatment group, 20 people would get the placebo, and then you look at outcomes between the two groups. And hopefully, with randomization, you are able to do that apples to apples comparison. Okay, and so with that, let me go into eligibility criteria. So, what are eligibility criteria? Well, they help produce accurate data. Again, I'll keep repeating it here. Clinical trials are experiments. And just like in an experiment that you would do on a lab bench, where you control the amount of reagents or the type of reagents you use or the type of chemicals you use to put into a test tube, in a clinical experiment, you would have inclusion and exclusion criteria in terms of who can or cannot participate in that experiment. This does not mean that you cannot participate in trials altogether. It just means that this trial has some parameters, some guardrails, and you would need to fit into those parameters or guardrails. So I'll give you an example. For example, if you have a drug that you are testing that works by correcting a gene mutation, you're going to look for people with ALS who have that particular gene mutation. You would not take people who don't have the gene mutation or some other gene mutation because you know the drug is not going to correct that. It works by correcting that gene mutation, so you need to get people with that particular genetic form of ALS. Maybe you have a drug that works on lung function and you're recruiting for that trial. Well, you want someone with some lung dysfunction so that you can see if the drug recovers that dysfunction. But maybe you don't want someone who has lost so much of lung function that improvements might be hard to assess. So there might be a narrow window of lung dysfunction that becomes the inclusion criteria for that trial. You can't have no lung dysfunction, or you can't have too much of lung dysfunction. You got to be in a range. And that's what happens in a lot of clinical trials. But there are other things that may be used, such as age, such as functional state, um, and so on. All right. So now, how do you find trials? Well, there are many ways to find trials. You can search any of these websites on the left. NEALS.org, which is the largest clinical consortium for ALS in the world, probably, has a trial navigator that they have partnered that you could go search for trials. You could go to clinicaltrials.gov, although I would suggest you don't. It's not an easy database to search through. It's run by the government, but has clinical studies throughout the world. And IMALS also has a tool finder, a clinical trial finder that you could also use as a dashboard for looking up trials. What I would really bring your attention to is on the right side here, which is a one-on-one support. So the ALS Association has partnered with My Tomorrows, which is a patient trial navigation concierge service. Yes, I said concierge. We understand that the process of identifying and potentially pursuing a clinical trial can be challenging. And together with My Tomorrows, we can provide you support through this journey. This service and support by My Tomorrows is free of charge for people living with ALS. Once you register with them, you get a call scheduled with the trial navigator. Then you receive your personalized overview of trial options in your area and of your preference. And you can take those options to discuss with your doctor. So, you could scan the QR code here and schedule a call with My Tomorrow's patient navigator, and hopefully they can find you a way to one of the 40 trials that are recruiting in ALS right now. Now, once you have found a trial, that's just the first step. There's a lot that goes through once you have found a trial. You or your doctor reaches out to a trial site. That's when the process starts, and it includes the initial contact with the trial site. Maybe if you're lucky, the trial site is at the same place you go for your care, but sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes place where you go for your care every 3 months or 6 months may be different than the site where the clinical trial is actually happening. There are pre-screening questions that happen. There's review of medical records, there's scheduling of formal screening to see if you have the inclusion-exclusion criteria. One thing I would say to you is please do not get frustrated. It is easy to be and do in this case. You may feel stuck. Response times vary from site to site. You may feel disrespected that the site coordinator is not calling you back. The ALS Association does have a funding strategy to help the sites increase capacity so that they're not burdened with running the trial and thus are not getting back, to people living with ALS. We're even funding building of new sites. So there are more opportunities for people with ALS to be recruited into the trials. But, you know, these trial sites get many, many inquiries. They have limited enrollment slots. And, they have eligibility reviews that patients have to meet. So it can take time. So please don't get frustrated. Stay on it, be your own champion, and hopefully My Tomorrows can help you get there. Okay, and so just the last couple of slides here, and then we can finish up. Um, so once you get enrolled, the study team becomes your partner. They will explain the research to you in detail. There'll be a screening process, as I said, to determine if you're eligible to participate. There'll be an informed consent. Informed consent is really, really important. I know it seems administrative. It seems like a form that you just, agree to or sign on to, but you should really read that informed consent because this is where you are giving consent to participating in the trial for your data, for your samples to be used in a certain way, and so really important to keep that in mind. And from a participation standpoint, you would be assigned to one of the two groups. Remember, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. And again, depending on trial type, You may be in one of the two research groups. You'll get instructions on how to take the medication, how many times you should come in for testing. These clinical trials do require appointments over several months. So it is a commitment, commitment by you, commitment by your family member to help you participate in the trial. And I think this is the maybe the last two slides, but there are some FAQs on our website that you could go to. Um, you may be wondering about the cost of participating. Generally speaking, if these are IRB approved clinical trials run by sponsors, most costs are associated with participating in the trial will be covered by the insurance or the study sponsor. If if a trial is asking you to pay for the therapy, you should really be suspicious about that. Um, Now, that doesn't mean you don't have out-of-pocket costs. There may be some out-of-pocket costs around transportation, lodging, meals, and parking, but more and more companies and sponsors are covering that. And so I don't think that should be a problem as well. Um, can I participate in more than one trial? Usually, no. You can participate in an observational study and an interventional trial, but you cannot participate in two interventional trials at the same time. And the reason why you can't is now you're confounding the study. You don't know whether you're in a placebo or study group in trial one. And if you're now on trial two, and now so imagine if you're doing two trials at once and you're in placebo for one and study group in the second, how would the two trial sites know, if whatever data they're collecting, whether it's happening because you're in the placebo group in one or the study group in the other, right? That would never happen. But there are observational studies where you can still continue to participate in clinical trials. What questions should I ask before deciding to join? There's a list of questions that you should ask. And I see that my colleague has been posting some links for you in the chat. Print that questionnaire out. Take that questionnaire with you and ask questions of the site, of the trial. It's your right. You're participating. You're giving your time. You're giving your caregivers time. You're giving your effort, your physical, psychological status and burden in being in these trials. You have a right to ask questions of the sponsor, and you should take these questions and get answers to them. What happens after a trial is over? Well, you could get into an open label extension. Open label extension is where, and this is generally happening with most trials now, where people that are on placebo are then switched to the active study drug, and people are followed much longer following the double blind treatment. And so that's what's called open label extension. So everybody's now on the drug, and you're looking at long-term effects, safety and efficacy of the drug. Um, and you may get final results communicated to you in different ways through a webinar, through a publication, excuse me, through a press release. So that's what happens after a trial. You will get unblinded at that point in terms of whether you were on placebo or study drug. And so these are the things that can happen after a trial is over. And I think this is the final slide. Remember I told you about observational studies where ALS focus survey research is an observational study. It's ALS Association's observational study where we want to hear from you. Um, we and what it requires is not you coming to a trial site, but you having an access to computer and being able to answer questions. This is an IRB approved study, and the current survey that we're going to be launching starting March 23rd all the way into May 22nd is a survey about assistive technology for everyday activities. Whether you use these high-tech devices, a few simple tools, or no technology at all while you're living with ALS, your perspective matters. And so, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from current caregivers. We want to hear from former caregivers. They can all participate in this very critical research from home. Please register today at alsfocus.org. You can do so by scanning this QR code. And with that, I will take questions. And I will actually stop sharing the slides so that I can see the questions and can answer you directly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. There's already a handful of questions, so we'll get to those in just a minute. And if you haven't submitted your question yet, go ahead and do that with the Q&A box now. And I'm actually going to hand it over to Melody Schaefer, our Senior Director of Mission Programs, who is going to help moderate our questions today.
Thanks, Amber, and thanks, Kuldip, for a great session on clinical trials. Before we get into some of the questions that have come through, I want to give you one that I hear all the time, and that is, when do we start the process? When should somebody engage with their physician about clinical trials post-diagnosis or use one of these resources that we just presented?
As soon as you want to, is the answer for that. Look, ALS diagnosis can be really difficult. It's um, something that really strikes you. You have repercussions for yourself, for your family. Um, it's not an easy diagnosis, and so there are times when you know that takes time to get to understand that you have this debilitating serious disease, and it may take a little bit of time. So respect your mind and your heart. And when it is ready to participate, that is the time to bring this up. There is don't wait too long. If this is something that you would like to do, most trials have an inclusion criteria of 18 months from diagnosis, sometimes 21, 24 months from diagnosis. And so if you are so inclined to participate in trials, you want to raise your hand as soon as possible. And so, um, if you're ready after that first visit, you should bring it up with your trial, with your clinical care site. You should feel, free to reach out to My Tomorrows and get yourself registered. I think it's really important for you are the one that needs to make that decision. Um, but again, as I said, there's a little bit of a timestamp on it because the longer you wait, the less chances you'll have to participate in interventional trials. Now, for someone, if you have the disease and it's been 18 months or 24 months, doesn't mean you can't be in interventional trials. There are observational studies that are just as critical. We didn't talk about that today. So you are still able to participate in research. Melody?
Similar to that question, can you talk about what EAPs are, how they are different from clinical trials, and what resources we have to promote EAPs?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, and I actually have a slide. So let me share my slide with you. Uh, because I kind of expected this. So can you see my slide, Melody?
I can,
Okay.
yes.
So I think I talked about open label extension here on the left. So the open label extension is when you are in a trial and you're done with the randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled part of the trial, let's say it's 6 months. Everybody on placebo then gets switched over to the study drug. And then everybody is followed for another 12 months or 18 months or 2 years. And that's called the open label extension. So, uh, this gives anybody who participated in the trial, no matter which group, to receive the investigational treatment. The question was about expanded access. Expanded access program is for people who are not eligible to get into any trial, either because the inclusion exclusion criteria exclude them out, or they're way past the guardrails or the parameters of the trial that I talked about earlier. It's been more than 24 months since they were diagnosed, or maybe they can't get to the trial site as frequently because of their disease. Well, there are expanded access programs, and these are programs that have been set up by sponsors, pharma sponsors, to provide access to experimental therapies before approval to those people who don't qualify for um, interventional trials. Uh, we're still collecting science, so this is not just compassionate use. There is still science and research that is happening with this type of study where you're collecting safety and biomarker data, which helps get the treatment approved from the FDA. And so EAP is also something that's listed on many of these search sites. And My Tomorrow's, the concierge service I talked about, also helps with EAP studies as they do with randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials.
Thanks, Kuldip. One of the questions, or several of the questions, has a current theme, which is really how often should folks be checking these resources? Specifically, you talked about the 40 that are currently enrolling. When do we see new trials? Is there trends where all of a sudden more are coming live? And the second part of that, if you could just talk a little bit about regions, about how sometimes trials are open in the US, or there might be a press release. And I did get one very specific question, which I will address offline, about one specific trial. But sometimes we do see those press releases about other countries, or based here in the US and then moving out. So kind of a two-parter. How often are we seeing new trials or eligibility change? And how do these regions impact where a trial is available?
Yeah, good question. So I would say every 3 months, if not every month. New trials are coming on all the time. And I don't want someone to miss out on a trial. This is what's also great about My Tomorrows, is that if there are trials that you could match for, which are brand new, that you would be contacted to and be alerted that there might be another trial that you have been connected with. Um, I would say at least every 3 months, if not often, more often than that, is when I would search these. A lot of times they may not change. It would be still 40. But you never know. You may get lucky and there might be a 41st or a 42nd trial. Every time I go and do this, when I search up, that number is always different because trials are ending, so they get taken off and new trials are coming on. So, it's not the number, right? It's not 40 that is, sometimes it may still be 40, but in the next 6 months, maybe 3 trials ended and 3 new trials came on. So it still looks like there are 40 new trials, but actually there are 3 new trials that have added to the 40. So I would say every 3 months is probably the best way to do it, if not every month. In terms of outside of United States, yes, there are trials that happen outside US. A lot of these um, trial sites that excuse me, the trial finders, one from NEALS, the one from IMALS, the one from clinicaltrials.gov, they all indicate where the sites are. So it will tell you whether they're recruiting in the United States or recruiting outside. that can be frustrating because maybe you want to be in a trial. Maybe that drug looks exciting or there's been some press around it, but it's not available in your area. It's available in, you know, maybe you live in Texas and it's available in New York, or you live in New York and it's only available in Europe. That can happen. If it's within the United States, you should still try because there are sponsors who will still pay for people to go to different sites. I think there are some considerations on how much they pay and all of that, but um, it doesn't hurt trying if it is within the United States. The other thing, as I said, is the ALS Association has a funding strategy to fund um, uh, sites to both development of new sites and increasing capacity of existing sites so that we can have more people access care for ALS, but also have opportunities to be participating in clinical trials.
Thank you. What updates can you give us on gene therapy trials?
Yeah, so just maybe back up a little bit. So what is gene therapy? Gene therapy is where you are going in and changing the gene that is directly responsible um, for causing the disease. And so um, the idea around gene therapy is that, if we could use something like a virus, think about, your cold virus or your flu virus, right? But it's not cold or flu virus. It's a virus that's inactive and um, can be given in a safe manner. The idea is that viruses will do what they do, which is they go into our cells, they infect our cells, and they uh, take over our DNA. And so the idea is if we can program those viruses in such a way that that they could go in and deliver the normal gene or maybe correct the gene that the viral particle would then be integrated with our genome, and we would correct the dysfunction that was happening through the gene mutation. So there are a couple of trials, excuse me, uh, therapeutic programs that are looking into gene therapy. They're very early on. So it is in phase one for SOD1, for example, which is the gene that affects 2% of ALS. And so there is a gene therapy being developed for that. And it's very early stage at this time. But, we surely hope that more of these types of gene therapies, not just against SOD1, but other genes, and hopefully even against targets that are affecting non-genetic ALS or sporadic ALS, which is, for everybody.
Everyone's favorite hot topic. How is AI impacting trial, either through enrollment, finding, or the science itself?
Yeah, so we could talk about that. It could be a whole webinar all by itself. So I'll try to do my best to talk about it in 5 minutes. So let's work backwards. I think you said, how do they affect trials or our understanding of ALS? Um, our understanding of ALS it's is what we understand is that it's a really complex disease. We know that no two people look alike clinically when they have ALS. We also know that it's not just a clinical heterogeneity, it's actually a molecular heterogeneity and pathway heterogeneity. That one person may have ALS because their inflammation pathway is not working, whereas another person may have ALS because their mitochondrial dysfunction pathway is not working. Um, and so they're not just changes at the clinical level or diversity, but there's diversity at the molecular level, at the protein level. And so with this kind of complexity, a human mind and our analytical mind can only go so far. This is where AI and machine learning can come in. And so we do currently have many projects ongoing where people are using machine learning and AI uh, to understand ALS, to understand the different pathways that go dysfunctional. In fact, we are funding one of the largest machine learning AI studies that is looking at the Answer ALS data sets and trying to find biological changes that are happening in ALS that are not there for people that don't have ALS. So it's really, really important for AI and machine learning. I mean, it can do amazing things. And so why not leverage it to find new biologies and new targets? You talked about trials. How is it changing trials um, or the trial finders? And again, AI and machine learning can be used to connect patients to trials. So, in fact, instead of patients going in and, looking for some trials and not knowing what inclusion exclusion criteria there are, wouldn't it be great if patients go in and put in all their information and trials sponsors go in and put in all their information? And if there's a AI or machine learning that now kind of matches the patient profile with the trial profile, you have a match.com for patients and trials. And so that is essentially what My Tomorrows is doing using their technology. And so I think AI continues to help in refining and getting patients faster to trials. I think in terms of trial itself, again, I think AI is helping us understand how big the trials need to be, how long do they need to be, how what's the kind of groups need to look like, what does the placebo need to look like, what it could help with randomization, it could help with statistics and power analysis. And so there's just a lot of things that AI can help across that pipeline.
Okay, and the last question, these last few minutes, is what's one thing you hope everyone takes away from today? I know at the beginning you talked about the diversity and the robust pipeline, but maybe moving away from the science for the folks that are really going to go look for those trials and try to navigate the system of enrollment to participation. What's something that you hope everyone is able to take away from today?
Yeah, so I really hope that you didn't think this was too much. We tried to simplify the presentation. Um, I was not trying to trivialize when I was saying trials are experiments, but they are. And you are your own best champion. And so, if you want to participate in these experiments, you need to raise your hand and, whether it's your clinical care doctor, whether it's the clinical trial coordinator at your ALS multidisciplinary clinic, whether it's your neurologist, whether it's My Tomorrows, where you register, uh, whether it's the registration for ALS Focus Survey program. I hope you take the power in your own hand because it is in your own hand. And when your mind and heart and your body is ready to participate, participate. Raise your hand. This is this, and as I said, don't get frustrated. It can be a long journey to get into a trial. And then once you get into a trial, that can be a long journey. Um, yes, the ALS Association is trying to make that journey easier through, more better, faster trials, more better, faster clinical trial sites, and more better, faster trial recruitment. But, you know, it's an opportunity for you to help research, science, and yourself and future patients and people living with ALS. And so I would say that I hope that's what you get out of this webinar.
Thank you. And I saw Amber's note come through that I think she's going to come off screen, and I'll turn it over to her.
Yeah, thank you, Melody and Kuldip. This was a wonderful presentation. There's already been some great feedback, so I know people are finding it helpful. I want to remind you all that this webinar is recorded, and we will be posting not only the recording, but we'll also post a copy of the slides and links that were included. So you'll be able to get those easily, and you'll be able to find those on our website at www.als.org/webinars. And I would love to invite you to attend our next webinar, which will be on Tuesday, March 31st. So later on this month, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And the title of that webinar is Understanding Brain-Computer Interfaces for ALS, the Synchron Approach. And don't forget, there's going to be a survey that'll pop up on your window once we end this webinar, and it's always so helpful to hear your feedback. So thank you again, Melody and Kuldip, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.